Oh, hey, you're back. Already? That was pretty quick. I didn't expect you. Anyways, this is a continuation of my last video, which was all about how to take good pictures of cars. I went over some tips on setting up the scene so everything looks good. But in this follow-up, I wanted to dig a little deeper into the editing process that I use. I use Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'll do a couple sample photos and kind of go through my usual workflow, and we'll make those Alfa Romeo Spider photos jump to the next level. So let's get on the old computer. Okay, so we're back home now and we've gotten a good variety of shots. So maybe you're perfectly happy with how they came out and you can stop there, don't need to do anything. But if you want to give them some extra pizzazz, some extra magic, this is where shooting with a real camera really comes in handy, especially if you shot in the RAW format. The RAW file format gives you so much more information that you can work with to bring up shadows or bring down highlights. You just have a lot more flexibility in editing as opposed to JPEG. You can still touch up JPEGs and make them look nicer, but I shot RAW for these on my DSLR, so we're going to dive in and I'm going to show you a couple examples of how you can enhance your pictures. So this first one is an easy one because it's already a good picture right out of the camera. There's nothing glaringly wrong with it. But one of the first things I would do is apply lens profile if it's not set up already. So I'm using Adobe Lightroom, which is a great program for photo retouching. Highly recommend it. But down here, if you click Enable Profile Corrections, I've got my lens loaded in. Luckily, it knows what it is. It's a whole collection they have of different lenses, and they already know what the issues are with that lens and how to correct for it. So if I show you a little before and after, you can see there's a little distortion correction and a little bit of vignetting correction down in the corners. So what we end up with is a really nice even image to start with. Next thing to do is to get the exposure right, and this looks pretty spot on to me. You can always bring highlights down a little and shadows up a little just to give it a little more dynamic range. And then what I like to do is look at the whites and blacks. So if you slide this around and you hold the Alt key or Option key, you can see where it's clipping or peaking. So we've got a little bit up there, and that's the mirror. I'm not too worried about stuff like that when it's actually the sun or something, because that's going to clip no matter what. And then the blacks, if I bring this down, we can see it's not too bad. I don't mind having a little bit of clipping because you just know you're maxing it out. Yeah, this is looking pretty good. Maybe a little more on the shadows. Okay, now we can start messing with the color and clarity. I'm gonna try a medium contrast curve. Yeah, that definitely helps make it pop a bit more. And then with color, don't go too crazy, but I like to add a little bit of vibrance and saturation. And this is starting to look pretty nice, but the ground is starting to look very yellow. So a super handy thing you can do is come down here to the color adjustments. And you can either manually do this and slide down the yellow, which you can tell already helped. Or if I reset that, you hit this little bullseye, bring it over to the image, click the color that you want to affect, and then drag it down to bring the saturation down, or up to bring it up. Holy schmoly. So I think I'll just do a subtle, let me reset. Just a subtle reduction of the yellow. Something like -20. Looks pretty good. We don't want to lose these turn signals. And if we zoom in all the way, let's look at the details a little bit. We can add some sharpness if we want. Doesn't really need it. If it's really noisy, you can do some noise reduction, which I don't really think this needs it. I don't mind a little bit of grain because that's part of photography. You're gonna have some grain, makes it look natural. And let's see, we can also try a little bit of clarity. This is an interesting one. If you go too far with it, it's like, whoa, crazy. If you add a little bit, it kind of helps make it look a bit more detailed and contrasty. There's also this texture one, which is pretty crazy. I'm gonna leave that alone. And dehaze is a handy one if you find yourself in some fog or something. Anyway, to finish this off and put more focus on the car, I'm either gonna do a post-crop vignette, which is, you know, in extreme sense, it's this type of darkening. And you can do this to get a better idea for your settings and then bring it way back again. And this is kind of nice. It draws your attention to the car a bit more. But one of the main things with editing that I want to get across is not to go too crazy with it. Everything you do should be relatively subtle because you don't want it to look unnatural or fake. You're just trying to enhance the image. So if we look at a before and after, this is the after, and that's how it was straight out of the camera. So it's not hugely different, and yet it looks so much better. I dig that, it looks great. So let's move on to a more difficult one. I'm gonna go to the library and scroll through everything I got, hundreds of pictures. And some of these ones later on turned out great. This is a kind of a finished one. If I go to the develop settings on this one, we can take a look. So I have the lens profile correction on it, raise the exposure a bit, highlights down quite a bit, shadows up quite a bit, whites and blacks adjustment like always. I did add a little texture here for the asphalt, some clarity, vibrance and saturation, contrast curve. Everything here is pretty similar to what I did on the last one. The big difference here is the hood was really dark because the sun was coming from the side. So if I look at the original picture, this is how it was straight out of the camera. And here it is edited. So this is, again, one of the great things about RAW is there's enough information there that I could brighten up this hood. And I used this adjustment brush tool. So you can see the setting I have on there is really just to raise the exposure by quite a bit. So I can show you, and I put a range mask on as well, so it's just affecting the highlights. There we go, there's a good visual of the area that I put this brush exposure adjustment onto. And so if I change it, you can see I'm just changing that area. So go back to where it was. And that really helps. That's a good way to fake having an assistant with a reflector or an extra flash off to the side. You can get away with these dark areas and brighten them up after the fact when you're shooting RAW. So that's a great trick. Something else I like to do sometimes is these graduated filters. So it's this icon up here, and you set it up kind of how you want, and you drag and drop. And I like to sort of darken the ground in the foreground because again it draws your eye up to the car. And we could angle it a bit because we're at an angle here. And you can also do it to the sky. Maybe you don't like the color of the sky there, so you can change the temperature. So we go for a more orange sunset. So we darken it. Oh, that looks weird. What about more of a blue sky? Oh, interesting. That's kind of extreme. My computer's starting to struggle here. Yeah, I think a bit of blue looks nice. So if we look at the before and the after, that's made a pretty massive difference. Now I would say from here, I'm a little bit picky with my pictures because I've been doing this for a while, but I would probably go into Photoshop and just get rid of some of these pieces of debris on the ground and the stain in the asphalt. It's pretty easy to do. Well, why don't I just show you how? So whereas Lightroom is great for making adjustments to your photos and making them pretty as far as the color and everything, Photoshop is where you would make alterations to the image. So if we want to make some changes to this foreground here, I've brought it into Photoshop, and I'm going to use the healing brush because it actually adapts the color, unlike the clone stamp. And I'll take a sample of the asphalt from nearby and just go over this. Grab a couple different samples and try to blend it in, and it's gone. How about this little stick here? Gone. How about this thing? I'll try to get the shadow too. Nice. This little debris over here, why not? Details matter, you know, just like detailing the car. If you have a clean image, it's really going to draw your attention to the car and look like a work of art. It's basically what it is. We're creating art here. How fun is that? Okay, this big stain here, you could do the same thing with the healing brush. You can also try the patch tool. Draw around it and then have it set to replace the source. I'm going to take a sample of a different area that's nearby. How about that? And it will try to blend that in. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Maybe one more little spot up there. Healing brush again. Come back out. That looks a lot better. You're gonna keep seeing stuff. This is where it's hard not to be super picky. You gotta stop somewhere, but that looks pretty good. Now, one thing I will say is avoid the temptation to cover up scratches and imperfections on the car, because that's dishonest. Don't do it. Like, look, I have this little dent right here in the hood. Tiny little ding. I could easily get rid of that. And if I was doing this purely for artistic reasons, that'd be fine. But since we're doing this to actually sell the car, it's dishonest. So I'm gonna leave that, leave the flaws, but have a beautiful image that tugs at the heartstrings. And this is what I was talking about. If you watched this whole series I did on this car, cleaning it up and everything, in the first video I said you want to sell the romance when you take your pictures. And this is a clear illustration of that right here. You really want to tug at the heartstrings and show why this is such a desirable car that somebody would want. So taking it to the beach at sunset, I mean, come on. It's just glorious. So I think we've set ourselves up for success. We've done everything we can. We've taken glorious photos, we've cleaned it up. So I'm pretty confident that we're gonna get a strong result when the time comes to sell. So wish us luck, and thanks for watching this series. And look forward to more car stuff with many different types of cars. We'll see. Take care.